webinar today is about the value of qualitative and modern research in sports business. We'll talk about some innovative qualitative research approaches today, and I believe it should take about 45 minutes, and that should include time for question and answers. And speaking of questions, if you'd like to submit questions, if you could take a look at the right of your screen, there's a toolbox, and at the bottom of that toolbox, there's a chat box where you can send questions. So please feel free to do that. Let me get to the panelist slide. All right, our panelists. Emily Bockino is the Director of Advertiser Insights at ESPN. Emily's team is responsible for demonstrating the value of sponsorships and campaigns for advertising partners of ESPN. Karina Bohn is the Vice President of Marketing at the Arizona Diamondbacks. Karina is responsible for creating and communicating why people would want to go to an Arizona Diamondbacks game throughout any season. Her goal is to maximize the highs and minimize the lows. Stefanie Francis and I will also contribute to today's session, of course. Here are some examples of some of Navigate's clients. We work with sellers like the NFL, ESPN, of course, and the Diamondbacks, IMG and GMR. We also work with brands like Southwest Airlines, Red Bull, AB InBev, Sony, etc. Navigate is an industry leader in evaluating and measuring marketing investments. We're based in Chicago, and basically we help clients determine the value of their partnerships and how well these partnerships are performing. We have valued billions in sponsorship over the years. Let me get to, okay, here we go. Let's get into discussing some qualitative research approaches. And basically, I'd like to just really briefly mention a few examples before we get to our panelists, just to kind of set the stage about what is available in qualitative research. Biometrics is measuring biological responses of respondents. For example, we measure eye tracking, heart rate, facial patterns, perspiration, and voice inflection. Modern focus groups, you know, we still do traditional focus groups, and there is value in traditional focus groups. But we've also found that sometimes they can actually inhibit sharing instead of enhancing it. So based on the objectives, we create experiences that are similar to maybe a reality TV shows, or we hold game shows, or we conduct events in more fun or natural environments. For example, maybe at a stadium or at a local sports bar to conduct our focus groups there. In ethnography, we watch and often videotape fans as they consume and interact with sports. We may watch how they use secondary devices, what reactions they might have to sponsorship messages, if any, or how social settings change the experience. That is a single person, multiple people in different environments, etc. But it's basically observation research. And finally, I wanted to mention a couple of words about mobile research studies. The benefits of mobile research are reachability because of the prevalence of smartphones these days, the ability to reach a younger audience, and the ability to capture quantitative and qualitative information at the same time. So in addition to answering survey questions on a respondent's mobile phone, they can also upload pictures or short videos to add color to their responses and help us interpret the whys behind their behaviors and their perceptions. Of course, these 4 examples only scratch the surface of what's available these days with qualitative research. And before I turn it over to our panelists, I'd like to mention just some other approaches, just to mention them. There's crowdsourcing, and that's not on your screen, but there's crowdsourcing, and that is asking a question or questions on online networking sites. There's social media research, and by that I'm thinking of scraping content from sites. There is instant polling, netnography, neuromarketing, which is really very similar to biometrics, and so on. Just to mention the array of possibilities we have these days to engage in qualitative research that is very different, very innovative, and takes advantage of our modern day capabilities. But really, the majority and the rest of this webinar, we'd like to spend discussing specific case studies of qualitative work that Navigate has conducted. And I'll ask Stefanie Francis to walk us through 2 projects that she was the lead on with our panelists.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. This is Stefanie Francis's voice, and I am incredibly excited about today as qualitative research is one of my passions. I have incredibly enjoyed working with both Karina and Emily on these 2 projects, as well as other qualitative projects that we have done to really innovate and use really sound research principles, but in a modern and creative way. First, we're going to start off with one of our case studies from ESPN. It's an ethnography study that we did with Emily and her team in 2012. And they came to us and really wanted to understand how the emergence of second screens or new technology has changed the way that football fans, primarily college and professional football fans, are watching and connecting with their favorite teams at home. So Emily, I'd like to turn it over to you and have you just talk through your reasoning for the research and objectives, as well as what information you knew, but then needed to know more of.
Absolutely. So the idea for the project actually started after having some internal conversations here about what we were observing in our own homes. And we were noticing our spouses and friends and family members all kind of having a different take on their living room with the addition of new technology options. So that obviously had an impact when watching sports, in particular for football, which is so prevalent in the fall and has a wide fan base that have the opportunity to be reached by all these devices. So we really wanted to see if the trends that we were noticing casually in our own personal lives were also extending across fans in general. So really, that's how the topic evolved. And so from there, we created the objectives for the study, which is really to understand how the technology usage was transforming the in-home football viewing experience. We wanted to understand whether or not fans were compensating for the technology that they had with others that they don't have, or vice versa. So what were people doing depending on what devices they owned and what devices they were choosing to use at a particular time. We wanted to understand how technology has created a new living room dynamic between family members. So whether or not that was impacting relationships or those that were viewing together or those that are viewing alone. And then how has the experience of advertising in games changed with modern technology? Of course, that's always a key priority for us when thinking about our advertising partners. And then finally, the growing popularity of fantasy football certainly has a role in this as well. So we wanted to understand how does the fantasy football and TV game viewing experience intersect. So before we embarked on the research project, what we first wanted to take a look at was what did we know? So we really went through our syndicated sources to try to understand what information is out there about these new devices, particularly while viewing TV, and even more specifically while watching sports. So we took stock of what we could learn from our syndicated sources to give us a background of what we could expect to see and maybe help us prepare for the dialogue that we were going to have with our participants once we got there. So this slide includes some of the information that we had found at that time about the growth of the technology, the penetration of these new devices, you know, the fact that those watching TV while using a tablet skew older, for example. So understanding the demographics that go along with the different devices and how that relates to the TV usage. It really just provided a backbone for what we were hoping to find with the qualitative research that we were going to uncover with this project.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. And what's so amazing about working with Emily and her team at ESPN is they come to us with questions, and they don't come and say, you know, we want to do an ethnography study. They say, how can we work with you to come up with a methodology that's gonna answer these questions that we're looking to have answered, and let's work together to brainstorm lots of different options of ways we could answer these questions. And so what we tend to do is internally come together and really look at all of the options. And oftentimes we'll even throw in quantitative options, even if we think this is going to lean towards being a qualitative project. But you probably could imagine we could have sent out a survey to football fans across the country and asked them about their technology usage while they're watching football, what devices they use, and you know what they're doing on those devices and what they're doing during commercials. But we really felt like that really wouldn't get at really understanding the hows and whys of how technology is changing the living room as it pertains to football watching. So we really wanted to go a qualitative approach and really felt like watching fans in their home environment was the only way to get at that. So where we landed is we chose eight different sets of fans, and it was important to ESPN to understand different dynamics. So some of those were a single male fan watching football at home alone. There were groups of friends who were watching at times. There were pairs of people, whether they were in a relationship or just two friends or family members. And then what was deemed the distracted couple. And part of the hypothesis here from ESPN was that with technology, fans are changing because let's say stereotypically there's a male fan and his wife really wants to spend time with him and they want to spend time together, but she doesn't necessarily want to watch football. So is she in the room now reading on her Kindle or on Facebook or doing other things that can allow them to be together because of technology and still share this time together? It was also important to look at different types of devices and understand where fans were turning for different kinds of information, whether it would be communicating with friends, whether it be looking at apps and specific information, and how fantasy football tied in with laptops or other elements. And then lastly, just because we wanted to take a look at everything, we also paid attention to their social media interaction, what was happening during commercials, and again, checking in with apps. So what I'll show you on the next slide is just a quick look at, it's not an actual slide from the report, but the elements that went into this qualitative report to just show you how the story can really come through when you have a qualitative approach much differently than it does with a quantitative study. So that quantitative study that I mentioned would have been graphs and charts and a little bit more colder of a feel and more difficult to really understand and feel and see fans in their actual environment. So we are able to compile the best videos, snippets that we can to tell the bigger story, actually show direct quotes that fans were saying to each other during the game, compile that with the insights and the story that we end up telling throughout the entire report, and obviously still photos are important. One thing I will say how we set this up, we were Emily and I actually were in a separate room And we set up a live HD feed, a live camera, and we're able to watch the fans while we were secluded in another room. And then at the end of 4 hours or 5 hours, however long their game viewing was, we were able to go do one-on-one interviews and ask them about certain moments. So within the full report, there are the videos of them watching the game together or alone, and then the individual one-on-one interviews. So I want to dig in a little bit with those videos, just to kind of show you some of the way that this came through the report. And the video I'm going to show you first is a father and son who were watching football together. And to us, this really pointed out the difference that technology is making on the different generations. So in this video, the father had come over to his son's house to watch a very important game to him. And the son, in his mind, he was going to watch all of the games. So he had split his cable line to have a separate live feed to his laptop, which you can see there kind of dangling off the table. And he also had his smartphone out. So he was flipping between games on his laptop, communicating with friends, looking up information, and the dad was there to watch one particular game. So if there's a problem with the audio on your end, we'll talk about once the clip plays what actually happened. I'll play it now.
Good play, guys. Good play over. This is your I'm almost relaxed.
So we titled this "You Missed It, Joe," and it kind of became a theme because I'm not sure if you could hear, but that's what the father said to Joe. And it was a very big play, and the father turned to his son to high-five him and to connect the way that he remembers connecting with his father. And Joe was distracted and looking at his phone. And what was interesting and telling to us, you probably noticed the father literally shift his body language to where his back was to his son. And there really was a lot of disappointment in his energy and in his emotion. So with this moment on the next slide, we're able to afterwards interview both the son and the father about their experience. And I'm only going to play the son's response, but I will tell you that the father, you know, he knows that he has to adjust, and he says, you know, I understand that this is different, but it made me sad that he missed this play. But the son's take, which we were going to play for you, is his take on why technology is important to him and his understanding that the times have changed. I'll play it now.
That's sort of the catch-22 about having all of these sort of different thoughts go through your mind and using all these things, is I've just come to grips that I'm going to miss some crucial parts of games. When I'm flipping between channels, there's always, I guess my anticipation is always that I'm going to miss something really big at that point in time. But I just don't know of yet a better way of dealing with that.
Yeah.
You know, there used to be picture-in-picture, you know, where you could have one on the right corner or something like that, a little live stream of another channel going, and then the big one. But that was never feasible for me because it was too small. It was always too small to even make out as to what was going on.
So there was a little delay with the actual video, but I believe you heard everything that Joe said there. And to me, the most telling piece of what he said is, I don't know of yet a better way of doing this. And in my mind, this is why ESPN wanted to do this type of research, to be able to see what's lacking and what's missing and what's needed to be able to create something, hopefully, down the road that will compensate for this gap. And the final video I'll show is from one of the gentlemen that we watched when he was alone at home watching by himself. So we were also in the other room, and the hidden camera was out there watching him. And what we noticed is that this gentleman was in 5 different fantasy leagues, and he was on his computer or his laptop 90% of the time that in his mind he was, quote unquote, watching football, even though his attention was completely on his laptop. And so I wanted to ask him how much time he thought he was watching TV versus on his laptop. I'll play that for you now.
Gordon, I probably know. You guys probably know better than me now. I would think the game more.
Yeah, but you're not sure.
But I go on my laptop, just a flip of pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would think the game more. I hope so.
Were you on? Is that scary to you to think
Yeah.
you were watching the
Yeah.
screen more than this?
Yeah. It's pretty sad.
Do you think again, the video is a little bit delayed on my end, but to have experienced that sitting with him, and when you can see the full clarity of the video, what really comes through is he really had no idea that he was on his laptop 90% of the time. And when he started to realize it and think about it, it was sort of a heavy moment where he was like, wow, that's sad. I'm not watching the game the way I did when I was a kid and the way that I always have. So things like this are really the only way that they can come out are through a qualitative study where we can see it, feel it, ask about it, and really understand the hows and whys, again, which is why we love qualitative research. And Emily, if it's okay, I'd love for you to chime in a little bit about how ESPN used this research and what decisions or conversations it led to internally.
Absolutely. So primarily for us, it was a way for us to see and to understand what was happening in our fans' living rooms, and for us to come to the realization that it wasn't just us here internally that we're seeing this shift, but that this was happening at a broader scale in our fans' homes. Was an insight for us to know and something for us that we could pass along to our advertising partners. So, we get a lot of questions from our advertisers about what's happening, whether their ads are seen, how can they activate, how can they get attention to a screen, any screen really, to get their brand recognition during those important game days. And so this helps us to understand a little bit more about what was happening, that we could think about ways to strategize and consult with our partners to help them activate in the best possible ways. So really, it was valuable for us in a lot of ways, and we hope that we were able to pass along those insights to our advertising partners as well.
Emily, if I could break in real quick, we have a question from the audience, and I'm not sure if Stefanie has actually already mentioned this, but I'll read it to you anyway, and I think it's for you, Emily. Were you present doing the research, and did the fans know it was an ESPN study?
Yeah, so good questions. Stefanie and I actually were present in that we went to the homes of these participants, but we set up the cameras to monitor their living rooms, and then we stepped out into a side room in the house, so we were out of the way, out of their cognizant realization that we were there. But we were kind of hiding out, observing, and when the game was over, we were able to go back and speak with them and ask questions about things that we noticed during the experience. And it is quite important to note that they did not know that ESPN was behind the research. In fact, we did this for both college football on Saturday and NFL on Sunday. And for those of you that may or may not be aware, ESPN has the rights to Monday Night Football. So the games they were observing on Sunday were actually some of our the broadcast networks that were airing those NFL games. So it wasn't necessarily that we were even primarily interested that they were watching our games. It was just the concept of sports in general and whether or not they were even using ESPN media platforms to complement what they were viewing on other networks. So no, they did not know that ESPN was behind the study.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Sorry for the interruption. Stefanie, anything else there?
No, thank you, Mark, and Emily, thank you so much. I still chuckle at the fact that these extreme football fans had no idea that ESPN was in their home, and they thought they were just participating in a research study funded by, they didn't know who, but they were still all for it. So definitely creative and fun stuff. So thank you for trusting us.
Thank you.
With that, I wanted to turn to another study with the Diamondbacks, and Karina is here with us today. And one of the great things about Karina, working with her, is that she understands and appreciates the combination value of doing both quantitative and qualitative research in conjunction. And we did a study for them in 2010 that we followed up with in 2013. And I will, Karina, let you go ahead and jump in and talk about your reasonings for the research and what you were looking to get out of it.
Sure. So our first research that we did back in 2010, we wanted to get a sense of how we could bring more fans back to the ballpark. That's really what any baseball team wants to do, is sell more tickets and get people in the stadium. So our attendance had dropped over the years, and the question that we wanted answered were, why aren't some of these fans who used to come to games currently not coming to games? So really finding out what were the drivers behind that. Was it a change in financial status? Was it a case where they had kids that had grown up and gone off to college? Was it a case that they had a favorite player and the player was no longer with us? Or they were someone who really relied on team performance to get them on the bandwagon and then may have jumped off the bandwagon. So first we wanted to pin down the reasons that they weren't coming, and then what would need to happen in order to make them come back. So is it a financial decision, and if so, is there a ticket price that can lure them back in? Or are they looking for more things to do beyond just watching a baseball game? So once we found out why they weren't coming and what we would need to do to make them come back, then we also asked the question, how do we craft those messages? So does it need to be an emotional appeal? Does it need to be a dollar and cents appeal? Does it need to be very straightforward? And then also within those groups that we were studying, how do we get that message to those people? Every one of the groups that has a different reason for coming or not coming to a game, they may also be receptive to different types of campaigns, and they may also get their information in different places. So that was the first qualitative research that we did back in 2010. And once we got the results back from that, we really took away some action items on some places where we had opportunities in the market to really differentiate ourselves. So when we launched our second study last year, we thought, okay, we want to continue a quantitative study where we measure the increases in those areas that we specifically targeted. But we also wanted to get more of a sense of, not just the black and white numbers and scales of those measures, but also the passion. Quantitative is fantastic for giving you numbers, but it's also very hard to pick up the passion and emotion and thought processes behind the decisions that fans are making. So when we came into this year, like I said, we did the qualitative, looked at that, and then with the quantitative, we were actually able to make adjustments on the fly, small adjustments when necessary to try to dig in more based on the feedback that we were getting from the fans. So it was a great opportunity for us to see fans in more of a natural environment where they're watching sports and how they felt about the team.
Thanks, Karina. And similar to what we did with the ESPN study is we met internally to brainstorm how best we could answer the questions that Karina was looking to have answered. And as she mentioned, we repeated the quantitative study just to test the impact of the specific measures that they had spent 3 years messaging around and investing in to see if that had paid off. But we really wanted to re-examine how we did the qualitative approach. In 2010, we did traditional focus groups. So we recruited fans, the target fan groups that the Diamondbacks were looking to reach, and we brought them to a traditional focus group facility. And for those of you who have not been, it's a relatively sterile environment. You know, there's the one-way mirror. You can't see. You're around. You can't see kind of who's behind the mirror. You don't quite know. Fans are around a large conference boardroom, and they're having sort of a sterile conversation in an environment that really isn't true in our minds to the sports experience. So we thought about what could we do to modernize a focus group, and we threw around a lot of ideas. And at times we thought that they were a little bit crazy, but we really felt that they were in line with preserving the solid research principles, but also creating something that is reflective of what fans are used to and see in their day-to-day lives. So we talked a lot about reality TV and how people, you know, like to have their 15 minutes of fame and like to give their opinions and aren't turned off in 2013 at the time by a microphone in their face and a camera in their face. And so we brought the same number of fans, 30 fans, to a local sports bar, and we had one of the rooms off to the side, and we set it up to look and feel like a reality TV show. And we brought in what we were calling entertainment, because I think that that's also part of the sports culture these days. And so I brought in a local sports radio host to provide color commentary about his time and experience with the local teams, and tell stories about, you know, the locker room after this game, or what the third baseman said after the certain play, and really integrate the research with a full experience for them. So we set it up, and then we went back and forth between a group conversation with the radio host, and he did not know who the client was. He didn't know the depth of what we were looking for. I just worked closely with him to bring up these certain high-level conversations, and we wanted to see where that would go. And that's what we will spend some time talking about. But before we jump into that, I just want to talk about the quantitative results and show you what we looked at for those components, like fan experience and community partnerships, and the Diamondbacks being affordable. So we knew, as you can see from the slide in front of you, that the time and effort and commitment that Karina and her team put to executing on the research findings from 2010 had paid off. All of the areas that they devoted themselves to in those 3 years saw statistically significant increases. So we knew that. And on the next slide, we'll show you what the qualitative look and feel looked like. So similar to ESPN, you're able to see that we were able to show the one-on-one interviews that we did, as well as the group discussion, the group interviews, all told in a story format with the color commentary of the quotes, as well as the insights that were gathered from all of the video that we collected. The next slide is going to show you the whole room, how it was set up. So you're able to see that we had a professional HD videographer that we worked closely with. This was the room that was set up with the lights, and the camera was very fully exposed. Our radio host is there, and he was leading the conversation, again, versus a researcher in that sterile, typical focus group environment. And as we watched the discussion that was ensuing of those top topics, I was looking for, and my team was looking for, specific people who we could tell had some more information that we knew that Karina and her team wanted. So Karina was actually in the room here, and they had no idea. They just thought she was another either person that works for Navigate, had no idea that it was the Diamondbacks that was sponsoring this particular research. And then during the intermissions of the group discussion, we would pull individual people over to the side to do one-on-one interviews. And during those breaks, there was 5 different screens in this particular room that were playing all of the live games of the day, and then facilitated conversation and basically typical bar, sports bar livelihood and behavior. And while we certainly never would encourage drinking, they were given a cash stipend, and they were told they could do whatever they wanted with it. They could save it, put it away towards their kids' college, or they could go up to the bar and grab a beer. As you can see from the tables, most of them did the latter. All with the purpose, though, of, again, recreating what's typical for sports fans and celebrating that in a way that's going to bring out the best and most relevant insights. And with that, I'm going to show two clips that we ended up using in the report. One is more in the group discussion, this first one, and we were asking about fan experience, and this is one gentleman's take on fan experience.
I've gone to plenty of stadiums and games where my team has won, and I've still walked away with a bad taste in my mouth because of the experience.
So in this case, he was not talking specifically about the Diamondbacks because we were really asking about all of the professional sports teams in the Valley. So Karina could understand the perception of her potential competition slash what other teams were doing right that she could draw from. So it really did hit home how important fan experience is, because if a fan's team can win and he walks away still not with a great taste in his mouth because of the fan experience, it's obviously it's important. Karina, any thoughts on the fan experience portion right here?
You know, the fan experience feedback is great because you can sense from a fan just how important it is. And a lot of times we equate it to a restaurant. You might go to a restaurant and have a great meal, but if the service is terrible, you're probably not going to go back. Now, on the flip side, if you go to a restaurant and there's great service but a horrible meal, you're not going to go back there either. So we focus on the things that really matter to us. So obviously we do everything that we can to have great play on the field, but the feedback from this fan, which is similar to what we've heard in other places, that if they don't have a good experience, they're going to walk away not feeling very good. And as we all know, they're probably going to tell other friends about that experience versus if someone had a good experience. So it was good reinforcement for us because the fan experience is a key element of our overall brand.
Great, thanks, Karina. And our last video is showcasing the one-on-one videos that we were able to do, the one-on-one interviews. So during the intermissions of our reality TV show Feel, we interviewed folks one-on-one. And this particular gentleman, we were asking him about the perception of community involvement and what's more important. So I'll go ahead and play that.
I prefer to see players out, building things, visiting, people, and actually giving their time rather than just writing a check.
So in case that audio isn't coming through, the fan said that he really prefers seeing players out in the community giving their time rather than writing a check. And this was really relevant at the time. And Karina, I'll go ahead and let you jump in and explain more about that.
Yeah, what's interesting for us, and especially as we heard more feedback, one of the questions in the qualitative environment was which team in the Valley gives back the most to the community. And we know just how much the Arizona Diamondbacks give back. It is a great amount that is actually more than the other sports teams combined. Yet because it may not be as visible to people in the form of players out in the community or something that people can see or something that's well advertised by the league, people weren't necessarily aware. Giving a $100,000 grant to a homeless organization or the Foundation for Blind Children, that's not something that people necessarily see. So I wouldn't say that it necessarily changed our philosophy toward community giving because we continue to do a lot of community giving, but we also came to the realization that the way community giving sticks in people's heads is when it's more visible out there. And we do have more programs now that are sort of visible and tangible because that's what fans typically respond to.
Wonderful, thanks. And then on that note, the next slide is how the research was used internally. And I know that you've touched on that a little bit throughout this, but if there's a little bit more you want to elaborate on in terms of how the Diamondbacks used this research in the current season and wrapping up last season.
No, what was great, so talking about continuing to reinforce the important messaging, we're the least expensive ticket in baseball. And we continually, though, battle the perception that it's expensive to go to the game. So if you looked at the qualitative increase that we saw in affordability, that was great, but there's still a large percentage of people that don't realize it is affordable. The qualitative allowed us to hear directly from those people on how much they thought it was to attend a game. We realized, again, with the convincing nature that people are telling the interviewers, you know, it costs this much for a ticket and this much for food and this much for parking. We realized we still had opportunities there to get that message across. So it made us realize that while we've made improvements in getting the message out there about affordability, we still need to reinforce that in our advertising. Another thing that came out of the qualitative study was the messaging and how it's received. So one of the fans had said, look, I just want you to tell me what I'm getting and how much it costs. That's all I want. And he was more of a family-oriented fan, so that might be someone who's budget conscious. So it makes us realize that when we're advertising to that segment, we need to be very, very specific about what we're advertising. As far as, you know, do you get a hot dog? Do you get a ticket? Do you get a drink? And how much does it cost? But another fan, they talked about how much they enjoyed seeing other teams and other big players come in. So we know that if we're advertising to a baseball fan, we may need to reinforce more these big matchups or big players that are coming in. And then, as I was just mentioning with the community, we pursue the community involvement differently. I wouldn't say that, you know, we discontinued anything, but we realized where we had the biggest opportunities to let people know about the community giving that we were doing. And one of the more visible programs that was created last year was a D-Backs Give Back jersey program, where thousands of Little Leaguers in the Phoenix area received D-Backs jerseys for their teams at no cost. So that was something visible that was out in the community that we've gotten lots of great positive feedback about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karina. And we want to, oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. Before you continue, I have another audience question. Is this a good point to read that?
Yes, please.
Okay, and I'm not sure if it's for Karina or for Stefanie, but I suspect, Karina, this is directed at you. So the question is, what do you feel was different about the information you gathered in this versus traditional focus groups?
Well, I think Stefanie alluded to it, but in traditional focus groups, it is a little more stiff. It is a little more formal. So our last focus group, we're on the other side of the glass. People are being handed pieces of paper. They're in an environment that is not a normal environment where they're thinking about sports and kind of in leisure mode. Whereas when you're inside a sports bar, when you're having a drink, when you're surrounded by other people who are more relaxed, I think people have more of a tendency to let their guard down and let their true opinions come out. There was no getting around sort of people's opinions. No one shied away from letting it be known how they felt, where sometimes in focus groups you might have someone that's a little less comfortable in that environment, so you don't get a true representation of everyone in the room. But I felt that the way that the entire group segment was conducted really helped that, but then also we at times had 4 panelists up front if someone had expressed an opinion in a given area. And then as Stefanie mentioned, there was a space off to the side where one-on-one interviews could continue. So it really gave us much more flexibility than, say, a traditional focus group.
Great. Thank you, Karina. Mark, are there any other questions specifically for Karina?
No, not right now.
Okay, great. Thanks. So we're going to wrap up today's webinar with a quick look on a project we're currently working on in partnership with Wasserman Media Group. And in our desire to continually stay cutting edge and one step ahead, we collectively decided to do a qualitative addition to a syndicated fan experience study that we are working on. The primary portion of that research is going to be a quantitative study of fan experience across the entire country. But we wanted that qualitative look because we believe in its importance. And we wondered internally for quite some time, what are the people's emotional response, the things that they actually can't control, so their biometric feedback that Mark mentioned at the beginning. And we are working and actively planning to field this study next month, where we are going to recruit fans to actually go to in-stadium events and a separate group to watch the same game at home. And we are going to have them with wearable tech on. So as you can see, it's sort of a tank top that would go underneath your clothing and would track their heart rate, temperature, their perspiration, their acceleration, as well as their voice inflection in real time. So we'll be able to be comparing and contrasting fans who are in the stadium compared to those who are watching the same game at home to really connect with the emotion of the fan and to be able to understand what components of the fan experience, whether it be in-game moments, whether it be frustrations with parking or frustrations with missed plays because they were in a concession line or in the bathroom line, and really be able to get at something that we as humans might not be able to acknowledge or remember or even communicate and understand ourselves as to why we are emotionally connected to sports and why it's so important to us. So we're going to go about this by sending fans to 4 different games of leagues. It's going to be the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, and MLS as a start to be able to really kind of quantify emotion and understand the connection. Our plan is to also have the HD videography element to be able to interview fans one-on-one after the game to compare and contrast their emotional response with their stated recollection of what happened. So we're very, very excited about this. It hasn't been done before, and we are leading the way in this direction and are very excited to share the results with the world at the beginning of next year.
Stefanie, I know we're running short on time, but I wanted to get one more question in that just came in about the biometrics. How concerned are you about participants changing their behaviors because you're watching and monitoring them? Aren't they self-conscious at that point?
Gosh, that's a really great question. And what's been so fascinating for me personally is to watch and see and then also hear from later how fans genuinely forget. So even that example that we talked about with Emily and ESPN, even though we set up and they watched us set up a camera in their home, they all, at a certain point, relatively quickly, forgot that camera was there. And then when we asked them about it, there was a moment of shock and surprise when they even remembered that we were in their other room kind of watching them live. So humans are interesting and amazing, and especially when it comes to this wearable tech, I was really adamant that it be something that is concealed and comfortable and not some big headgear, headset that they're wearing walking into a stadium where they're going to stand out to other fans. The fans next to them, sitting next to them at these games aren't going to notice that there's anything on them. There won't be a camera in their face at that time. So I feel really good about this particular study that fans will acclimate and just go on to being fans.
Okay, thank you, Stefanie. Well, this concludes our presentation. I want to thank everybody again for joining us for today's webinar on the value of qualitative and modern research in sports business. We thank you for your questions, and I apologize if I was not able to get your question in today, but we will be following up with everyone individually about any questions that you did submit, so please be on the lookout for that. Thank you again for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.